Reserves. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Speaker, I would yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gaetz.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. The MORE Act is flawed. It uses cannabis policy to do a great deal of social engineering, to create new taxes and new programs and redistribution of assets. But I am here as the only Republican co-sponsor of the MORE Act, and I'm voting for it. Because the federal government has lied to the people of this country about marijuana for a generation. We have seen a generation, particularly of black and brown youth, locked up for offenses that should have not resulted in any incarceration whatsoever. I'm also deeply troubled that the current policy of the federal government inhibits research into cannabis, research that could unlock cures and help people live better lives. My Republican colleagues today will make a number of arguments against this bill, but those arguments are overwhelmingly losing with the American people. In every state where cannabis reform was on the ballot in this country, it passed. It passed with overwhelming support. Matter of fact, the only thing that I know that's more popular than getting out of the war on drugs is getting out of the war in Afghanistan. But if we were measuring the success in the war on drugs, it would be hard to conclude anything other than the fact that drugs have won. Because the American people do not support the policies of incarceration, limited research, limited choice, and particularly constraining medical application. We are here in a time where many people in our country are suffering. They are in pain, and it is documented that states with medical cannabis programs see a reduction in the prescribing of opioids and the number of opioid abuses and deaths. We've held hearings in the House Judiciary Committee where people in our government must confess that this is in fact true, that the more we give people access to medical cannabis programs, the more we see a blunting of this horrible scourge of opioid addiction and opioid abuse. We talk all the time on the right about the need to empower people and empower states. Right now, the federal policy on cannabis constrains our people. It limits our states. And I would only hope that in the 117th Congress, after this bill invariably dies in the Senate, they will actually come back and pass the States Act, because the States Act acknowledges that we have screwed this up in the federal government. And while we've screwed it up, states have taken action. They've designed programs in the way that our great federalist system promises. And if we were to pass the States Act, then best practices would emerge. States that developed applicable programs for their people would be replicable, and we would see better policies. I'm going to vote for the MORE Act. It won't pass the Senate. It won't become law. But then we should come back in the 117th Congress, and we should truly do more for our people. I thank the gentleman. I yield back.
Gentleman from Florida yields back. Gentleman from Ohio reserves. Gentlewoman from Texas is recognized.
Well, let me first thank the gentleman from Florida for making this a bipartisan bill, and I thank him for his insight, and I know that we will have many opportunities to work together. I might add, if we pass the MORE Act, we will allow veterans, hospitals, doctors to be engaged in research to help our returning soldiers and veterans who are suffering from a variety of diseases that may be impacted by marijuana use. I'm delighted now to yield to Mr. Jeffries, a distinguished member of the Judiciary Committee and chair of the Democratic Caucus. 2 minutes.
Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank the distinguished gentlelady from Texas for yielding. The failed war on drugs first began almost 50 years ago when Richard Nixon declared drug abuse public enemy #1. At the time, there were less than 200,000 people incarcerated in America. Today, there are 2.3 million, disproportionately black and Latino. Many of those who have been incarcerated over the years in prison for nonviolent drug offenses, including possession of marijuana. The United States incarcerates more people than any other country in the world. We have ruined lives, families, and communities. It's a stain on our democracy. The possession of marijuana is done in equal, if not greater numbers by white Americans when compared to black Americans. And yet in community after community after community, blacks and Latinos make up approximately 75 to 80% of the arrests and prosecutions. How can that be? Marijuana use is either socially acceptable behavior or it's criminal conduct. But it can't be socially acceptable behavior in some neighborhoods and criminal conduct in other neighborhoods when the dividing line is race. And that's why we must pass the MORE Act, decriminalize marijuana in America, and bring to life the principle of liberty and justice for all. I yield back.